Hi guys, let's start. So for our last talk for tonight, uh, yeah. So for our last talk tonight, we'll have Ramon talk. Yeah, that's the topic. I don't really know.
Hopefully I'll be able to explain. Thank you thank you Shield Foundry for hosting this event again. I hope that you know me sharing the lessons I learned, I guess, the past over 5 years working with Ruby and large code bases will help you guys maintain and hopefully make less of a mess in the code you write as well. Um, so this should be helpful to both newbies and non-newbies alike. I would imagine though that some scenarios are a little hard to imagine if you're a newbie. So, a usual scenario for a lot of developers, they inherit a large code base, and that code base, because Ruby is, I guess, fairly new, and a lot of people did a lot of experimenting with crazy meta programming. The code base you have, that you've inherited, has a lot of that. You make a change, the tests pass, you're lucky if they're even tests. And you deploy, and then you get a call at 10 p.m. telling you that like half of the site doesn't work. So, what I've learned, or what I think when I write software is that objects have an API. I know it sounds obvious, but when making a change to code, at the beginning I didn't think about it this way. I think that as long as I hit the pages, if I did at all, if I felt that the changes I made were not too simple, and if the tests pass, then everything's good. But when you write a web API or even a gem, you are a lot more careful with the changes you make. And if you make any breaking changes, you ought to make sure that it reflects in the version of the API endpoint or the gem, and that you communicate that properly to the users of your API and or gem. So whenever I make a change to a class, a simple class, or a method, maybe it expects more than one argument, there's a little checklist that goes through my head, like, will this break anyone that uses it? Am I just adding an argument? Am I removing some? Am I changing the way or the output or what this method does that some other user in this code base might expect? So let's go through the lessons I learned. So this I already mentioned. Search the code base. I know it sounds simple, but even now, sometimes I forget to do that. If I'm gonna change the way a method behaves, I'll search the code base to see who else uses that method and change them, or make sure that they'll still work. What they expect from it is still correct. Safety net tests. So in case you didn't change everything, then hopefully, if you're lucky, tests will catch the error. Sometimes though, especially when the code is a little crazy and you're not sure that someone's using the method, you can just log and leave it there first. And I don't know, after a week or so, deploy to production after a week, you can grab the log and see if anybody uses it. if a week's enough. It really depends. I just used Rails Logger here, but I probably should be using active support deprecation. I just read about that, so I'm not sure about how it works, but I know it's used for certain things like these. So those are the lessons I learned when working on code base I inherit. But how about, you're most of you are software developers, so you probably write a lot of code, and when you write it, you have to think about the future developers. Like when you're gonna move on to another job or another startup, or you're just, you're gonna pass on the project to other employees in the company, you have to think about how easy it is for this class to break others if someone changes this in the future, this class or this method. Now, these techniques, they don't cover everything. In fact, the last section, I'll open the floor also to people who might have other suggestions. First, integration tests. These are nice because they really go through all your code. The problem is, if you want to test unit test level code, it's going to be really difficult. Your integration tests will break all the time. Your tests will run half the day. Okay, that happens. And from a top level point of view, when an integration test checks for really small details, it's hard to read. You don't know what's going on. An integration test ideally should be the golden path. Minimize metaprogramming. I don't know what else I should add to that. Except when you really have to, because sometimes you have, I don't know, maybe 10 methods that look similar but are different in subtle ways, and you can dry that code up. Then you metaprogram, right? So this is a class called meta that, okay, it's a silly example, but I think it will drive the point across. You create two methods called magic and unexplained, and all they do is spit out a string. And you have a user of that meta class that when you pass the symbol to the method rock, it will essentially call that meta class, the instance of that meta class, with that symbol, so magic. If you call magic on it, you'll get magic rocks. Now, when unit testing, especially when the method that meta user is calling, which is magic, is complex, you want to stub it, right? Because it might be an expensive method, it might do a lot, or it might just be really difficult to set up. Think active record model, and it has like so many associations, and that method uses them all, right? So you want to stub it because that's not what this test is about. This test is just supposed to make sure that the output of that method it's calling is used a certain way. So if magic is removed from that method list, the specs will still pass. If its behavior changes, if it no longer returns that string, maybe it expects a string to be a certain way, then the specs will still pass, and you won't be sure if meta user is still treating the output the right way. Solutions. I don't know, to make sure that meta, if magic is removed, at least the developer will be warned. You could put this expectation, but it still doesn't promise what output it'll have. You could cover it with an integration test. I consider some integration tests, like they don't have to be a cucumber spec, like Joan showed a while ago. That is an integration test, but integration tests to me are also things that go beyond just this class you're testing. It might hit this class and another class, and it'll go through. That could be an integration test. And if it's just going to concern those two classes, then it might not be so expensive to use also. And that's actually this third one. That's, if you don't stub it, then it'll actually hit the meta class. Now those three, I use them depending on how difficult it would be to implement it, or versus what benefit I get. And that really depends on what you're stubbing, if you're gonna stub, or what you're gonna cover with an integration test. And I learn all the time, so I would like to hear some suggestions also from you. But if you have any questions, you can ask now, or Twitter at Tayag.
Where have you seen better programming like this, bite you?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I don't know. Well, I guess if
and you mostly mean like dynamic method.
Yeah,
the
yeah.
definition.
Yes, and sometimes even classes that are created dynamically, although that I see a lot less. Now, usually those are done. Usually those are done when you're trying to be very dry, or maybe the problem is just that difficult, right? And the person who wrote it thought that they'd solve it using metaprogramming, and it may have been solved elegantly with metaprogramming.
The right place to use these techniques, it seems to me, is when you're making a DSL that makes some other code easier. But in that case, you really should test it well.
Yes.
You should provide those tests.
Yeah. Yeah.
But if you're just doing it in an application that's not meant to be used outside the application, you're probably more often than not you don't need it.
Yeah, more often than not, there's another way. Yeah.
You could log. Another thing, I think you showed logging for deprecation, but another thing is if you're enhancing another library or monkey patching somebody, it might be wise to just say that you're doing that.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, Ruby gives a lot of freedom, right? It comes with its consequences.
Enough room to hang yourself with.
They say that for C++, the original is enough room.
Any other questions or suggestions? Okay, well, you can also approach me. It's a little early, so I'll be around and eating chicken wings. Thank you.
So you decided to